Emily had just returned home from school, the sound of her backpack hitting the floor a familiar thud in the quiet house. As she entered her room, a small, unassuming package on her bed immediately caught her eye. The wrapping paper was a faded, generic brown, and it was torn in a way that suggested a long, difficult journey. There was no sender's name, no return address, nothing to hint at its origin. A wave of unease mixed with curiosity washed over her. She tore it open, her fingers fumbling with the last of the sticky tape. Inside, nestled on a bed of crumpled newspaper, was a plush toy unlike anything she had ever seen. Its wide, stitched grin revealing a line of sharp little teeth, and its oversized floppy ears gave it a look that was more unsettling than cute. It felt strangely cold to the touch. As she pulled it out, a small folded note fell from the bottom of the box. Written in messy, almost childlike handwriting, it contained a chilling instruction: "Take care of Labubu. Never leave it alone at night." Emily's nervous laugh was the only sound in the room. She assumed it was a prank from one of her friends, maybe a joke about her love for creepy aesthetics. She placed the toy, which she now knew was called Labubu, on her desk, and went to the kitchen to tell her mom about the strange gift. The brief conversation with her mom about homework and dinner plans provided a brief sense of normalcy, but when she returned to her room, her heart skipped a beat. Labubu wasn't on the desk anymore. It was sitting neatly on her pillow, its glassy black eyes staring directly at her. There was no way it could have moved. It was a toy. A cold wave of fear trickled down her spine, and she grabbed the toy, placing it back on the desk. She convinced herself she must have been mistaken, that she'd put it there herself and forgotten. But a nagging feeling told her otherwise. That night, Emily tried to ignore the unsettling presence of the toy. She left Labubu on her nightstand, a small, still silhouette against the ambient light from the hallway. She crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin, but sleep was a long way off. The moonlight slipped through the curtains, casting long, dancing shadows across her room, making every shape seem like a lurking figure. Around midnight, a faint, rhythmic scratching sound woke her up. It was a dry, scraping noise, like fingernails against wood. She glanced at the toy. It hadn't moved. Its form was just as she had left it. But the scratching grew louder, more frantic, and it was coming from the closet. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She grabbed her phone, the cold metal a small comfort in her trembling hand, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, illuminating the source of the noise. The closet door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible within. She hesitated, her mind racing with a mix of fear and disbelief. Slowly, she pushed the door open, her flashlight sweeping across the inside. Nothing, just clothes swaying gently, as if touched by a breeze from an open window, even though the window was shut tight. Convinced she was just tired and her imagination was playing tricks on her, she turned back to her bed. That's when her heart truly skipped a beat. Labubu was no longer on the nightstand. It was now sitting on the floor, right in front of the closet. Its stitched grin stretched wider than before, as if in triumph. The air around it felt colder. Emily stumbled back, a choked gasp escaping her lips. She quickly shoved the toy back onto the nightstand, her hands shaking, and crawled back into bed. She tried to convince herself that she was sleepwalking, or that the events were just the product of a tired mind. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Labubu was watching her, waiting for her to turn out the lights, waiting for the cover of darkness to make its next move. The following morning, Emily woke up to a new, more disturbing reality. The toy looked different. She picked it up, her fingers tracing its form. Its fur, which had been soft and fluffy the day before, now felt coarse and almost damp, as if it had been left outside in the rain overnight. The texture was rough and unsettling. She swore its eyes looked darker too, no longer like simple, flat plastic, but more like real, wet pupils that seemed to hold a murky depth. The changes were subtle, yet undeniably present. At school, Emily couldn't concentrate. Her mind kept replaying the events of the previous night. The scratching, the sudden movements, and the disturbing change in the toy's appearance. The warning note echoed in her mind. Never leave it alone at night. She was beginning to understand that the warning wasn't a joke. Driven by a need for a second opinion, she decided to ask her best friend Chloe to come over after school. When Emily mentioned Labubu and the strange things that had been happening, Chloe laughed it off, assuming it was a prank. "It's just a stuffed animal, Em," she said. But when Emily showed her the toy later that afternoon, Chloe's smile vanished. Her face twisted into a frown. "It looks creepy," Chloe muttered, her voice barely a whisper. "Like it's alive." The shared fear was a relief, a confirmation that Emily wasn't just imagining things. To prove to themselves that it was just a toy, they decided on a test. That night, Emily and Chloe carefully placed the toy inside an old dresser drawer, wedging a book against it to ensure it couldn't be opened. "It won't move now," Chloe said, trying to sound confident. But around 2 a.m., a slow, deliberate creak filled the silence. The drawer opened on its own, sliding out inch by inch. Emily sat up in bed, frozen in pure terror. Labubu was sitting on the desk again, its wide, stitched grin staring directly at them both. The book they had used to block the drawer was now lying on the floor. It was no longer a question of whether it could move on its own. It was a question of what it would do next. The next morning, the terror had not faded. Emily tried to convince herself it was sleepwalking, a subconscious part of her moving the toy without realizing it. But Chloe wasn't so sure. "I swear I heard something whispering," Chloe said, her eyes wide with fear. "When the drawer opened, I heard a voice. It was so faint, like a child's giggle. It was calling your name." Emily's heart plummeted. The events of the night before had been more than just a trick of the mind. They were a shared reality. Chloe, now a believer, insisted on recording the room with her phone. "We need proof," she said, her voice shaking but determined. They left Labubu on the chair in the corner and went to sleep. The faint red light of the phone's camera, a tiny beacon of hope in the darkness. Hours later, the faint, disembodied sound of giggling filled the room, the same sound Chloe had heard before. The girls lay motionless, too terrified to even breathe. In the morning, they rushed to the phone, their hands trembling as they watched the footage. For a long, silent stretch of time, the video showed nothing but the sleeping girls. Then, the camera caught something horrifying. Labubu slowly turning its head toward the bed, its body unmoving as its head twisted in an impossible arc. Its mouth moved slightly, its stitches stretching and contracting as if it were whispering something only it could hear. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. A slurred, garbled whisper that sounded like Emily's name. When Chloe showed Emily the footage, Emily almost dropped the phone. The image of the toy turning its head, its mouth moving, was a horrifying sight. "This isn't possible," she whispered, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "It's just a toy, right?" The question hung in the air, a desperate plea for a reality that was rapidly slipping away from her. The toy was not just moving, it was showing them that it was conscious. By the fifth night, Emily was terrified of sleeping in her own room. The fear had become a constant, suffocating weight. She begged her parents to take the toy away, to throw it out, to do anything to get rid of it. But they dismissed it as childish fear, a nightmare brought on by too much scary movie watching. "It's just a stuffed animal, Emily," her mom insisted, her voice calm and reassuring. "Stop imagining things." Reluctantly, Emily tried to sleep, the memory of her parents' dismissal adding to her mounting sense of helplessness. But in the middle of the night, a sharp, searing pain on her arm jolted her awake. It felt like 100 tiny needles piercing her skin. She screamed, a raw, terrified sound, and turned on the lamp. The sight that met her eyes was straight out of a nightmare. Labubu was on her bed, perched on her arm, its tiny stitched teeth sinking into her skin like real fangs. A single drop of blood trickled down her arm as she shoved the toy away with a force she didn't know she had. It went flying across the room, hitting the wall with a soft thud and falling to the floor. When she looked again, Labubu was sitting innocently at the edge of her bed, its wide, stitched grin wider than ever, a smear of her blood stained across its mouth. The bite marks on her arm were still there, tiny, jagged pinpricks. Emily's parents rushed in, their faces filled with concern. But when her dad turned on the lights, the bite marks had faded, almost like they had never been there. The blood was gone, and her skin looked perfectly normal. Only Emily knew the truth. Only she had seen the tiny teeth, felt the sting of the bite, and seen her own blood on the toy's face. Labubu wasn't just a toy. It was hungry, and it was getting closer. The terror had now become a physical, undeniable threat. Emily couldn't take it anymore. The lack of sleep and the constant gnawing fear had left her a hollowed-out version of herself. Skipping school felt like the only sane option. She spent hours online, not in the usual corners of the web, but in the forgotten, dusty archives of old horror forums and toy collector message boards. Her frantic search for Labubu toy initially yielded only bright, cheerful results: fan art, unboxing videos, and photo albums of smiling collectors. It was a terrifying contrast to the nightmare in her room. But then, on a decade-old thread buried deep within a site dedicated to cursed objects, she found it. A post from a user named The Collector. The user wrote about a version of the toy that was different, its grin sharper, its eyes darker, its fur perpetually damp. The description matched Emily's Labubu perfectly. The post went on to describe how the toy moved on its own, its presence making the air cold and thick, and how it would whisper to its owner at night, repeating their deepest fears and insecurities. The final line froze Emily's blood. If you have this version, do not try to sell it. Do not give it away. Destroy it before it destroys you. Emily immediately tried to call Chloe, desperate to share what she'd found. But the moment she mentioned the forum, Chloe's phone glitched violently. The screen flashed with static, and for a split second, a distorted image of Labubu's face appeared over Chloe's. Its stitched grin stretched into a grotesque, pixelated sneer. A high-pitched, childish giggle played through the speakers before the line went dead. That was all the confirmation Emily needed. She found a shovel in the garage, grabbed a heavy toolbox, and carefully placed the toy inside. Ignoring the way its eyes seemed to track her from within the shadows of the box, she carried it to the backyard and began to dig a grave for it. As she covered the hole with dirt, she felt a strange vibration beneath her feet. A low, guttural growl that seemed to rise from the earth itself. It was a sound of protest, of primal rage. She tried to ignore it, a desperate, irrational hope welling up inside her. For the first time in days, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. But when she woke up in the morning, Labubu was sitting on her pillow again. Not just on it, but buried deep within it, as if it had clawed its way through the fabric. Clumps of fresh, wet dirt still clung to its fur, and its glass eyes seemed to glimmer with a wicked, knowing triumph. The metallic, earthy smell of the grave permeated her entire room. Chloe insisted they try burning it. "If it's a curse, fire always works," she said, her voice shaking with forced confidence. That night, under the cover of darkness, they built a small fire pit behind Emily's house. As the flames grew, Emily felt a surge of defiant hope, a sense of control she hadn't had in days. She picked up Labubu, its fur feeling like damp, cold moss in her hand, and tossed it into the hungry flames. For a moment, relief washed over her, but then, the fire hissed violently, turning from a warm orange to an unnatural, pulsing blue. The air grew thick with a sickening smell of scorched plastic and something else, something foul and organic. A piercing, inhuman shriek echoed from the pit, making both girls cover their ears in terror. The sound was not of a toy burning, but of something alive being tortured. When the smoke cleared and the flames died down, Labubu was gone. Not burned to ash, not melted, but simply gone. Terrified, they ran back inside, slamming the door behind them. Emily begged Chloe to stay the night, but Chloe, her face ashen, refused. "I can't," she whispered. I need to go home. I need to be somewhere safe." She promised to call Emily the moment she got home, but the call never came. The next morning, Emily was awakened not by her alarm, but by the frantic ringing of the doorbell. It was Chloe's parents, their faces pale and etched with panic. Chloe never made it home. Police searched everywhere, the streets, the woods, the local river, nothing. Emily tried to tell them about the toy, about the fire, about the piercing shriek, but no one listened. They all saw a grief-stricken girl, imagining things to cope with the shock. That night, Emily sat alone in her room, the silence a heavy, crushing blanket. She felt a cold dread settle over her as she heard a faint scratching sound again. It was a familiar sound, but it felt colder, more malicious. When she turned, she saw Labubu sitting on her dresser, bathed in the pale moonlight. This time it was holding Chloe's favorite bracelet in its tiny stitched hand, its glass eyes glinting with a malevolent light. Emily opened her mouth to scream, a primal, gut-wrenching cry of horror and grief, but no sound came out. Her throat was tight, her voice stolen. The toy sat there, motionless, a silent, grinning monument to what it had taken from her. The curse was no longer just a haunting, it was a hungry, merciless thief. Emily's parents finally started to worry. It wasn't just the toy, it was Emily herself. They noticed her pale skin, the dark circles under her eyes, her unnerving silence. She no longer spoke, communicated only in scribbled notes, and her terrified eyes darted around the room as if constantly searching for a threat. Her father, a practical man who had always dismissed her fears, decided to take matters into his own hands. "Enough is enough," he said, grabbing Labubu from her bed. He threw it in the outdoor trash can, a sense of relief flooding him as the lid slammed shut. But minutes later, the can rattled violently. Her mom screamed as Labubu, its once pristine fur matted with coffee grounds and crumpled paper, crawled back through the dog flap into the kitchen, dragging its dirty stitches across the floor. Her father, now genuinely terrified, tried to rip the toy apart. He grabbed the sewing scissors, but they bent against the toy's seams like they were made of tin foil. He took a steak knife from the kitchen block, but the blade snapped in half the moment it touched the toy's felt. And when he finally gave up, his hands were covered in fresh, jagged bite marks. The marks were not just red. They were black and bruised like tiny venomous pinpricks. Emily's mom fainted at the sight of her husband's bleeding hand and the toy's unapologetic stitched grin. From then on, the house wasn't the same. Doors slammed on their own, lights flickered relentlessly, and at night, whispering echoes seemed to emanate from every corner. The whispers were specific, insidious. They'd tell her father he was a failure, and her mother that Emily was going crazy. The toy was feeding on their fear, their sanity, and their love for each other. Emily watched, horrified and helpless as her parents started to unravel, arguing, screaming, blaming each other. She knew the truth, a silent, chilling knowledge that made her skin crawl. The toy was no longer just targeting her. It was systematically dismantling her entire family. With her voice still gone, Emily went back to the old forum, the one with the collector. She messaged the old user, a desperate plea for help. The seconds felt like hours as she waited, typing furiously with trembling fingers. Hours later, she got a reply, a single cold line of text that felt like a death sentence. "It can't be destroyed. It chooses who to follow. The only way to survive is to give it a new owner. Give it to someone who has no defense, who has innocence to lose." Emily's hands shook as she read the words over and over, the cold truth of it settling deep in her bones. Could she really curse someone else with this nightmare? Her mind flashed to Chloe, her best friend, who was now a missing person. She thought of her parents, their faces now gaunt with sleepless terror, their loving marriage dissolving into a sea of accusations. She looked at Labubu, sitting on her dresser, its grin impossibly wide, its eyes fixed on her. She realized it was a choice between her family's destruction and the potential doom of a stranger. Her conscience screamed at her, but the alternative was a fate far worse than her own. That night, under the cold, silent sky, Emily placed Labubu back in the box. She sealed it shut with a roll of heavy-duty tape, the sound echoing loudly in the quiet house. Then, with a trembling hand, she wrote a fake gift note on a card. She left it on her neighbor's porch, the family with the young boy who always waved at her, whose laugh she could hear on sunny afternoons. As she walked away, the weight of her choice pressed down on her, a physical sensation of guilt crushing her chest. It felt like she had buried a piece of her soul alongside the toy. For the first time in weeks, she slept peacefully. No scratching, no whispers, just silence. The absence of fear was a comfort more profound than anything she had ever known. Days later, Emily noticed the boy next door, Leo, carrying the toy with pride. He held it up for her to see as she got the mail. "Look, I got a new doll," he shouted, his voice ringing with pure, unadulterated joy. His parents smiled, unaware of the lurking danger now nestled inside their home. Emily's stomach twisted with a familiar dread, a sense of crushing guilt so profound it made her knees weak. She forced herself to look away, to ignore his innocent joy. Maybe it was over for her. Maybe she was finally free. She told herself that Leo's family would be fine, that they would just see it as a weird toy and throw it away. She was wrong. That night, Emily woke to find a small package at the foot of her bed. Confused, she unwrapped it and froze. Inside was not Labubu, but another plush toy she'd never seen before, just as unsettling, with an even sharper grin. This new creature's eyes were not stitched, but tiny, intricate marbles that seemed to pulse with a faint internal light. Its body was made of coarse dark fur, and its name tag simply said, "The Harbinger." Her phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a new message from the same forum user. "You can't escape. Once chosen, it never leaves. Labubu was only the beginning. It finds its way back to you, sometimes in a new form. This is the harbinger of the next wave. It has chosen a new soul to feed on, but it will always return to you to start the cycle again." Emily dropped the phone as the new toy's eyes seemed to glimmer in the dark, reflecting the moonlight. Outside, she heard a child scream, a piercing, terrified cry that was quickly silenced. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. The curse hadn't ended. It had only spread, leaving her at the heart of an ever-expanding web of horror. And she was the one who was responsible for it all.